Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, Episode 507, Tropical Storm Helene, Devastation in the Mountains, Part 2. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with Tropical Storm Helene, Devastation in the Mountains. Here, I continue with my personal story, what happened to me after Tropical Storm Helene. Today's show will feature a little bit of background footage from the storm, but mostly footage from Burkhead Mountain Trail in Uwharrie National Forest near Asheboro, North Carolina. To get there from Charlotte, take NC 49 north, heading towards Asheboro. As you're approaching Asheboro, before you hit US 64, take a right on Tot Hill Road, shortly before the Asheboro Airport. Go down Tot Hill Road about a mile or so, and the trailhead parking area is on the right. Burkhead Mountain Trail, it goes up a small mountain, but still through some beautiful woods. So now, let's continue with Tropical Storm Helene, Devastation in the Mountains. It took them a few days, but eventually on Thursday I was able to drive out. In the previous days I would drive along the road trying to get out, and someone from the fire department would stop me and tell me it's not ready yet. But in the meanwhile, I was meeting my neighbors, and talking to them. One of our neighbors offered us food and showers and laundry, because she had a generator with lots of propane. Perhaps it'll last a couple of months, where my tank was much smaller, just a 400-gallon tank, only enough propane for a couple of weeks perhaps. Anyway, so I met my neighbors. As I said, they all seemed to be really cooperating, helping each other. They seemed to be in good spirits, working on the dirt logging road to improve it so we could drive out. Finally, on Thursday, 6 days after the storm, I drive out for the first time. Cell service was so limited. Our cell service went down. There was only a very few places where you could get a weak signal. So I had to hike, or drive, if I could get across the creek by my neighbor's house, I would drive across the creek and then hike up a couple hundred yards up a hill, and I would be able to get a weak signal. I would call my sisters, first asking for a rent-a-car, thinking the road would be open up sooner. But they kept delaying the road open. So finally I told my sister to forget about the rent-a-car and instead focus on an Airbnb, a place to rent. This is where I am now, a place that is pet friendly for our 2 dogs and 3 cats. Meanwhile, the cockatiels escaped. The cage fell apart as I moved it. And so that was unfortunate. And then the finches I put with my sister in Black Mountain, and the fish are with the friends in Swannanoa. So it goes on and on. This devastation, this exhaustion. So, for the first week we were on the generator, and then a week after the storm hit, we moved to Charlotte. So now we're down in Charlotte. And we're getting used to Charlotte. Lots of traffic, sure. And hiking areas aren't as good, at least so far, as I'm used to back home in Western North Carolina. So hopefully I'll get home. I'm guessing anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. Who knows? First, I gotta get a tree expert or a team of tree experts to cut down that tricky tree, that big pine tree that's hung up in another tree, creating a dangerous situation. I need the experts to come in and get this done. Well, it's probably going to cost a fortune. But anyway, then once the tree's gone, the propane truck could come up. They claim they're working in my area, but who knows how long it will take them to deliver propane. And then if they do, and I move back, well, I only got a couple weeks of propane before I have to move out or get it filled again. Gee, it's going to be a mess. How long till we have electricity? Probably not for months. How long until the main road that leads to our neighborhood is rebuilt? Perhaps a year or more. There's many roads that need to be rebuilt, many bridges that went out. This is truly widespread devastation. It is truly awful. It is a lot to deal with. So, what can we conclude from all this? I think this storm was caused by global warming. Sure. It all boils down to things like SST, sea surface temperature. The sea surface temperature in the Gulf of Mexico was probably around 80 degrees, perhaps warmer. The warmer the sea surface temperature, the greater the evaporation rate, the more moisture that is transported into the air. So all this moisture, all this water vapor from thousands of square miles of the Gulf of Mexico at 80 degrees was lifted into the atmosphere, then carried north along a stationary front as it streamed from Hurricane Helene in the Gulf of Mexico. The moisture streamed along the stationary front northward to western North Carolina, where it rained for several days before Helene made it up there as a tropical storm. The mountains don't get hit often by tropical storms, and never by such a devastating one. This is unprecedented. This type of destruction, well, we have a devastating flood in western North Carolina in 1916, over 100 years ago. This one was probably worse. This is probably the worst natural disaster to hit western North Carolina in quite some time. It was awful. As I said, a lot of this created by global warming, because the air is warmer, the sea is warmer, and that creates a chance for more heavy rain. But don't forget, we're gonna get more droughts too. I know it doesn't make much sense. What do you mean heavy rain and drought? Well, let me explain it in a little more detail. I was taught about this way back when, in college, in the early 1980s, over 40 years ago, they knew about global warming. So try not to say it doesn't exist, because it did exist back then. Over 40 years ago, there was clear evidence of it. Now the evidence is even clearer. As I said, with communities mostly gone from Tropical Storm Helene. So, this unprecedented storm was, or at least the damage was largely unprecedented in western North Carolina. And the storm made it that far and hit western North Carolina that intense because of global warming. So there's more moisture in the air and more energy to transport it with. But what about the drought? Let's get back to this. So back in the early 80s, my meteorology professor explained that the rainfall was going to change with global warming. Instead of having more consistent rainfall of a moderate nature over large areas, we would have more concentrated rainfall over small areas but very heavy flooding rains over certain areas, while other areas, large areas, perhaps even growing larger as the years roll by, of areas of drought and deserts. So these areas of droughts, and so we have this destruction. So larger deserts, 20 years the deserts should be bigger than they are now. 20 years from now, the areas suffering from drought should be larger. 20 years from now, the areas that get flash flooding, well, the flooding will probably be worse. And yes, there could be another tropical storm Helene in store for western North Carolina. Sure, perhaps not over the next month or couple years, but probably sometime down the road. And perhaps within 10 years or so, we might see a similar devastating event. Who knows? With global warming, we're definitely going to see more powerful hurricanes and destructive flooding. But as I said, don't forget about the drought. We're going to get longer droughts, droughts of larger areas, more severe droughts, and expanding deserts too. So we could get all of that. More drought, more often, for longer periods of time, punctuated by occasional flooding. Well, I'm sorry if you just want occasional moderate rain. If you want that, then dial back the clock 100 years or so. Sure, because now we got global warming and the weather is different now. I know. I experienced it. But let's just focus on the theme of this recovery. The exhaustion, the literature of exhaustion. I'm exhausted is about all I could say. I've been incredibly busy. What, didn't you have time to get lots of good footage of the destruction from the storm? If you're doing a show about it, shouldn't you film it? Well, I did. A tiny bit. I didn't have time to film. I had to go back and forth from Charlotte to Batcave, picking up animals. First it was the dogs. The next day it was the cats. A couple of days later it was the fish. And somehow, by some miracle, I had a 20-gallon tank, quarter of the way, maybe a fifth of the way full of water. All the rocks were removed and the fish were removed. The fish were put in 2 smaller bowls. But somehow, like an idiot, I left the water in the tank. I don't know why, because the fish were contained in 2 smaller bowls. I covered up the fish bowls real good, and I, double wrapping them, so they're wrapped in 2 bags and wrapped all around. But the fish tank was larger, and I didn't double wrap it. I only put a single bag going over the top, a single plastic blue bag going over the top of the tank, and I pressed down, things around it to keep it tight. It must have been a miracle. I remember so well going down the rough logging road, a half an hour journey. hearing the tank slosh endlessly. Sometimes it sounded like it exploded as it went over a very rough patch. I'm not a slow driver. I was in a hurry. And despite that, bouncing along this road, explosive sloshing. We were soaked. Were we soaked with nasty fish water? No. Did the water all escape into the car, rendering the car soaked? And then you never could get all the water out, and the car forever smells like a nasty old fish tank. No, that didn't happen. It was a miracle. The back seat area where the tank was almost entirely dry. Where the two fish bowls were, just a little spot of water that could be easily wiped up with a single swipe of a napkin. A miracle indeed. And I think about the other miracles. Bumping into my neighbors, when I normally never see them. Getting vital information from them. I think there were many miracles that happened during this storm. To tell you the truth, I've been too busy to remember them all, but I know they were there. Just coincidences that seem so improbable. They basically got to be a miracle. So yes, there is miracles in the aftermath of the storm that perhaps helped me get along better and perhaps saved other people, perhaps saving their lives. My neighbor, well, I didn't know this, he works for the Batcave Fire Department. He was coordinating with the helicopter on using a radio because our cell phones were dead. He had no choice. He was coordinating with fire department dispatch, who was talking to a Black Hawk helicopter that we could see flying nearby. Suddenly, he said he had to go. He had to get a lady with cancer, bring her to the helicopter, and get her airlifted in. Well, he used to be in the Coast Guard, so I'm sure he knows all about airlifting people. Baba, come on, Winky. The dog was getting dangerously close to the camera. Oh no! Talk about destruction. I would hate to see the camera get destroyed. But meanwhile, our house survived, and it didn't get flooded. But anyway, lots of minor miracles, lots of exhaustion. After the fish, I had to go back and get the trash, and then a couple of days later get more trash, and the trash was all over the place because the bear got in the bear-proof trash can and had enough time to open it up and get the trash all over the place. Gee, what a mess, literally. And there's many other trips I have to take to Batcave, many other things to do. The list is almost endless. I'm just way too busy, way too exhausted, hardly having time to film this show. But at least I did it. At least I filmed it and described Tropical Storm Helene, Devastation in the Mountains. So, now let's continue with Tropical Storm Helene, Devastation in the Mountains. The saga continues. My story continues. My adventure continues. There's a lot going on, sure. But before I get into my personal story, well, there's a couple things we need to remember. First, most people are worse off than I am after the storm, and many people have totally lost their homes and or businesses. Numerous people have been injured, and there are lots of deaths, unfortunately, associated with Tropical Storm Helene. A lot of suffering indeed. But to help alleviate that suffering, countless volunteers, thousands of people have descended on the mountains, and people in the mountains helping out in their own communities between local volunteers and volunteers from far away. Gee, it's been making a difference. Hot meals provided, free of charge, at numerous sites throughout western North Carolina. People distributing water, house to house. People doing welfare checks. People evacuating those in need. People bringing in supplies to where supplies are needed. People helping rebuild roads, such as the road in Chimney Rock, which I believe was initially built by the West Virginia boys, and perhaps more people are helping now, perhaps the state finally pitching in to stabilize things and improve the road. I only seen videos of it, none of which is included here. I haven't been there myself in the Chimney Rock, Lake Lure area since Tropical Storm Helene. However, the devastation in that area is tremendous. Well, the devastation in the whole Hickory Nut Gorge Valley, from Girton to Bat Cave to Chimney Rock and Lake Lure, the devastation is immense. Numerous landslides, often taking out homes. Gee, it's really horrible. But with the help of volunteers to help rebuild the roads, distribute water, distribute supplies, do welfare checks, provide food, and numerous other services, gee, it's nice to have the help. Sure. But what happened with me? Okay, it kind of goes like this. There's a tree across the driveway. It's pitched up in another tree. And so it's kind of a dangerous situation to cut down with the tree that's fallen, but not quite fallen, because it got hung up in another tree on the way down. My landscaper didn't want to tackle it, so I had to call in the pros. Well, the first company I called, well, they don't show up for 3 or 4 days, and so I give up on them and call somebody else, further away in South Carolina. Well, these people showed up 3 days later, right when they said they would, and cut the tree, thus opening the driveway for the propane truck to come and deliver the propane. And so, the day after the tree was cut down, I returned to the house. I noticed that the gate was closed. I left it open. So I get out of the car to unlock the gate manually. But then I noticed the light's on the keypad. Well, the light wasn't on before. Does the gate code work? Yes, it does. It opens the gate. So did the battery somehow come back to life that runs the gate? Or is the electricity back on, since the battery is merely a backup? Well, of course, I checked that first. Wow, the electricity's on. I'm amazed. I thought it would be on for another month or more. Whoa, we got electricity. What's that little envelope on the door I see? Does that mean we got propane delivered? Oh, yes, we did. Gee, everything's happening all at once. Electricity, propane. I think I could move home. But I'm going to slow walk it. I'm still here in Charlotte, but I'll get home eventually. I have to move animals back home. Plus, there's appointments coming up. So I come back. Well, I come back a week or so later. Or, well, not a week or so later, I guess a few days later. But anyway, I come back and I'm supposed to meet the generator repairman. The generator's not starting. So I get the mail on the way in. We have to pick up the mail at the post office. Since the mail is undeliverable, since the main road to my neighborhood is gone. What do you mean there's no mail? I haven't been here in a week. Did you start delivering mail to my address? Oh, yes, we did, the postman says. Okay, well, great. So I go back to the house. The the generator repairman is not back yet. He hasn't showed up yet, rather. So I go to the mailboxes, about a mile from my home. I get there, get the mail. What's this? What do you mean there's no barricade? There's supposed to be a barricade here. The road into my neighborhood has been destroyed. I must check this out. I drive down. After a short distance, well, the road isn't buckled up anymore. And there was a stream cutting across the road, but it's repaired with dirt. I could drive across it. I continue on. Well, part of the road was just one lane, with a sheer cliff dropping off where the other lane should be. Even with pavement overhanging the cliff. So just like 3 inches of pavement, 3-inch thick pavement jutting out a foot or so above where the road has been washed out. So it's like a 20-foot drop off.
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, caseywaters2@caseywaters.com.